Hi, this is Ivan and welcome to the channel. Today I'd like to introduce you to the Airfoillabs Cessna 172 NG Digital. This is a great approximation of a Cessna 172 with the G1000 suite. This is the plane that brings me back to X-Plane. I love this plane. In real life, I'm an actual pilot. I hold a private pilot's license, and the Cessna 172 with a G1000 is the plane that I learned to fly in. And I've always been, as much as I love Microsoft Flight Simulator, I've always been disappointed in their most recent iteration of their Cessna 172, mostly in terms of the flight physics. And this plane really is exceptional when it comes to the flight physics. I think they did a really good job, and we'll go over that at length. So the first thing I'd like to do is take you to the outside of the plane, and we'll do kind of a little bit of a walk around. So here we are outside the plane, slowly circling around, kind of getting a good view of what it looks like. This is the screen that presents when you first load the Cessna into X-Plane. So you just kind of get a good idea of what it's like. I think they did a pretty good job of modeling this plane. This is the basic default version. There's no paint job, but there are plenty of paint jobs to choose from. I just wanted you guys to see the kind of default version. One thing that they will kind of go over really quickly is their menu system. So this is above and beyond the menu system, like say up here for X-Plane. If you bring your mouse all the way over to the left, this gives you a number of options, and we'll go through some of them. For example, this top row here is how you want the plane to present: cold and dark, before start, before taxi, or before takeoff. So in other words, you could just jump right in and be ready to fly. If you bring the mouse down to the lower left, you can see their look system, their camera or view system. And you would click on any one of these items and it would go to that particular vantage point. It has an inside and an outside, so that's pretty handy to have. I use this with the combination of the X-Plane standard view system. It has this quick look menu, which I've not fully explored. It does seem to be kind of complicated, but I'm sure it's fine once you get used to it. And to make that go away, you just kind of click on this red dot here. So from here, what I'd like to do is go ahead and go inside the plane. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go up to the view, change internal default view. And now we are inside the plane. So now that we're in the plane, let's kind of take a look around. I'm just using the standard with the mouse. So they did a good job. I like the way they made this a well-used plane. It's not super pristine or anything. It does have wear and tear, which is fairly standard for Cessna 172, particularly the trainers. They did I think a pretty good job of duplicating a lot of the items found in these planes. So if I come over here, I can click on this. That's a map. If I come over here, I can click on this, and this is that same POH that we saw from this menu down here to the right, to the lower right. So that's pretty nice. What I want to do now is kind of show you their menu system for looking around. So I'm going to bring that back up, and you can see you can just click on a given item and there and say there, any particular thing. And they just did a pretty good job of this. And what we'll do, they also have an outside version, and we'll take a look at that and kind of do a little bit of a walk around. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just click on the front. And here we are back outside of the plane. And you can see, get a good vantage point of it. And we'll bring that menu back up and just kind of walk from spot to spot. And just kind of, here we are here. And again, here. And what we'll do, since we're out here, we'll go ahead and remove some of these items. So if you bring the mouse over to the left, third item down, we can move across and we'll take away the pitot tube cover, the chocks, and the tie down. So that's, I like how that we do that. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and jump back into the plane. Okay, so here we are back inside the plane, and what we'll do now is a basic startup procedure. What I really like about this plane is that sometimes it doesn't start, because in real life, sometimes the plane doesn't start. And so I've actually had a few times where I couldn't get it started at all, and I had to reset the plane. Hopefully that won't happen today. But what we'll do is we'll go through the basic steps here and kind of see what we need to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the control lock. I'm going to pull the mixture out, and I'm going to make sure the throttle's all the way back. Engage the parking brake. We want to make sure that the fuel shutoff is pushed in, the selector is in the middle, and normally I would hang the key from here until I'm ready for it, but I'm going to go ahead and put the key in and kind of get set up. And one thing that I've, have noticed, just as an aside, that I really don't think there's any buttons in here that aren't functional. I don't think there's any in-op things here, like, circuit breakers pull, all the buttons press. So just be aware of that when we're going through the startup. So I already have some things assigned. So let me go ahead and I'm going to switch on the master. And if you notice right away that the screen's not lighting up, and this has actually happened to me in real life, where the person before me did not turn up the brightness, and that's in these the lower right knob over here. And so make sure that's turned up. So then the other thing we're going to do is we've got to basically prime the plane. So how do we do that? We're going to use the fuel pump and the mixture. And again, I already have this kind of set up. So I'm going to put my left hand is on the fuel pump switch, and my right hand is on the mixture. So let me turn the fuel pump on, and we should see some movement over here on the fuel flow gallons per hour. That top part should move a little bit. So let's see what we get. So fuel pump on, advance the mixture, pull the mixture back, fuel pump off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack the throttle. I've got my right hand on the mixture, and my left hand is now on the starter. So let's see if we can get this thing started. So here we go. All right, we got it started. I'm going to bring the RPMs back to around 900-ish. So now we've got that on. Let me turn that off. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to I'm going to bring up the second G1000, and I want to talk to you about something cool that they've done to make that happen. Okay, so let's talk about the G1000 here. First thing we need to do is, now that we've got the engine started, we'll bring up the second, the avionics buses. You don't want to do that before the engine started, so we'll turn that on, and we'll come over here and we'll basically do that. So one thing that Airfoillabs did that is really neat. So if you have external monitors, if you use Real Sim Gear, or if you use Air Manager like I do, then what you're going to want to do is pop these monitors out. Now, this was historically kind of hard to do. If I click this out, so now I've got this really nice looking bezel, but the problem is, if I want to bring it to an external monitor and put it under another bezel, either a software bezel or a hardware bezel, then it became a problem. And let me show you what that looks like. So the first thing I have to do is I have to click up here on the top right, and this makes it to where I can now move this to an external monitor. So what I'm going to do is I am going to bring this up, and we'll kind of look and see. So I can bring this over, and this is not going to work because the problem is you can't really get this lined under this bezel lined under the bezel that's already there. Once I let go of it, so to speak, by letting up on the mouse button, if this is under here, I'm not going to be able to move it again. So what do we do about that? Let's see. Let me go ahead and close this out. So a gentleman wrote an app, a third-party app, that would remove those bezels, but now Airfoillabs has made this an inbuilt feature. So we'll go back to the sim, and what I'm going to do is show you how that works. So I have two buttons, one for the primary, one for the secondary, and so now what I can do is, instead of having that bezel, I can now click on it, and you can see that I've got this bezel, or rather this screen, without a bezel. Now I have to make it to where I can move it to an external screen. So I click on that, and let's go back to the Air Manager screen, and I can put that there, and look at that. It lines up just beautifully. I'll go back to the sim again, and I'm going to do the other panel. And same thing, I have to come over here and put it in this state so it can be moved to an external. And let me show you. We'll kind of slide that over and you guys can see it. And there we go. Now you notice that these are lined up. And that's because I've already previously lined them up. So that is one thing that that X-Plane does. It's really nice. Once you get those set up the first time, assuming you don't move your Air Manager panels around, or I imagine with the real sim gear, it doesn't matter. But the next time you load it up, they'll just populate right where they need to be. They'll be perfectly set up and ready to go. And so I think that is a really cool feature. Kudos to Airfoillabs for doing that. So now what I want to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the the flight physics and all that kind of thing, and that is, to me, is what really matters about this plane. So let's discuss flight physics here for just a bit. So let's talk a little bit about flight physics here. So what we'll do is we'll do one pattern lap where we go through multiple phases of flight, and we'll discuss the flight physics as we go through each of these phases. Now, when we say flight physics, what are we talking about? We're talking about how the change of the sight picture occurs. So we're not feeling G-forces when we're making these changes in the simulators, but what we're looking at are the changes on the screen as they relate to the inputs that we apply, whether it's with the yoke or the throttle or the rudder pedals. That's what we're looking for. And, and of course, whatever the sim is doing in terms of wind and weather, we'll see that change. We're not feeling it, but we see it. And I don't have any force feedback gear, so I guess that might change things. But I feel like the physics for this plane is excellent and far superior to the flight physics for the Microsoft Flight Sim Cessna 172. And it's kind of bothersome to me because I feel like it's such a basic thing. And there's basically four areas that we're going to talk about. Left turn tendencies, which is really prominent on takeoff. And then the just normal flight characteristics of applying yoke and throttle. Then we'll talk about what happens when flaps are applied, and then landing. And I think that this plane, the Airfoillabs plane, does a really good job in most of these categories, and we'll kind of discuss it as it happens, and we'll kind of get ready to go here. So let me turn the parking brake off, Got that going. What I need to do real quick though is I need to dial in my barometer here. So I wanted to show you guys something just in case. This came up when I first loaded the plane. The barometer, just as it is now, was in hectopascal or millibars, depending on what you call it. And to change that, you're going to come over here to PFD and then Alt Unit, and then I'll change that to inches or inches mercury, and then so back. And you can see that that's changed and back again. So, and I know that the altitude of the airport where I am is about 260 feet. So let me change that. And that's actually pretty close. So we'll switch back and we'll go ahead and take off. So parking brakes off, and I'm going to apply throttle. As I do, I'm immediately going to have to apply right rudder, which I love. So right rudder already, a pretty significant amount. Now some of that's going to depend on the sensitivities of your rudder pedals, of your controllers. So, but it feels nice. So I'm about ready to rotate here. Let's go ahead and rotate. And in the Microsoft version of this plane, I wouldn't have to put nearly as much right rudder. In fact, I very frequently feel like I'm having to put in left rudder, which makes no sense to me, especially if I'm going into the wind on the appropriate runway. So now what I'm going to do is I'm looking for VY, and my flight is not, I'm not going to be doing this very well as I'm trying to speak to you guys too. So what I'll typically do is somewhere around 700, 800 feet AGL is when I make my first turn, trying to get to that 1,000 feet above ground level for the pattern altitude. And we're getting pretty close. So what I'm going to do is we are still, a couple hundred feet away. And the turning characteristics of this, just plain banking and all that, feels pretty good, feels normal. Microsoft does a good job of this part too. So I'm now making my turn, and I'm gonna level out here, and I'm gonna back off on my RPMs quite a bit, down to about 1900, 2000, something like that. I'm a little higher than I'd like to be, but that's okay. And let me get ForeFlight going. So far this part feels fairly standard, but that takeoff, that right rudder feels really good. So let me go ahead and make my downwind turn. And again, I'm around 2000 RPMs. I'm trying to keep my turn basically coordinated. And roll out. And kind of get it trimmed in. So it trims pretty well. I don't have any complaints with that, but I kind of feel like, you know, Microsoft does a good job of that too. And so now looking for those numbers. And the next big phase that comes up in terms of flight realism for me is when I apply flaps. And it definitely feels really, really nice. I say feels. It responds with the sight picture really appropriately. So there we are. We can go ahead and say we're beam the numbers. So I'm going to pull back my RPMs to about 1500. And 10 degrees of flaps. And that nose is trying to come up. I'm having to push down on it. I'm going to pitch to 80. See how slow it got when I did the flaps? And the nose pitched up. That is very similar sight picture wise to what I experience when I fly in real life. So now what I'm a little slow. Let me go ahead and make my next turn, or a turn to base. Trying to stay coordinated here. Feel like I'm a little low. And we'll roll out. I'm going to give more flaps. And that nose is really pushing up. And I'm a little slow. I'm going to add a little power back. Definitely a little slow, a little low. All right, make the turn. I think I just overshot the turn. Not overshot it. And that last bit of flaps, really pushing. Now here, slow down. All right, got good alignment. I've made the runway. I'm going to pull power. I'm going to come down to my transition and make my transition. There's my runway expansion effect. And that is the part that I don't like about this plane. I feel like the landing characteristics are wrong. This plane flies very heavy on landing. And I've probably landed this plane probably 50 times, maybe 75 times between this version and the version prior to it. And that's a little heavier than I normally land, but it's actually not much heavier. This plane seems to just plop on the runway, and I'm not sure what that's about. This has actually been mentioned in the forums by other people who've used this. I'm sure there are people out here that just grease these landings all day long. I've not been able to make it happen with this plane. And so, but that's, you know, it is what it is. I will take that over the rest of the flight physics that I do feel are pretty accurate. And, you know, again, and I keep comparing this to Microsoft Flight Simulator, that those left turn tendencies and that pitch up when you put in the flaps, I think that's just super important. And I think that that Airfoillabs have done an excellent job with this plane. Super excited about this. Again, this is the plane that brings me back to X-Plane constantly. So, anyway, final thoughts are that this is a wonderful plane. I love the way it flies. It's just an awesome plane. I plan on doing a video that kind of addresses the question that I hear quite frequently, and that is, should students utilize flight simulators? And I say resoundingly yes. And this plane, which is a very common trainer, would certainly be a good part of that. And I'll discuss that in that video once I make it. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments box, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. You guys have a great day.